Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives, and today we're going to be continuing / concluding our discussion on the Vault of Spiders miniseries as we take a look at Vault of Spiders number 2. Now, just like with last issue, we got a handful of stories here focusing on different Spideys, although whereas last issue gave us 4 stories, technically 5, this one has 3 stories, technically 4. Again, the 4th story is really just the framing device for the whole comic, and like with last issue, it's just Karn looking through the web of life and destiny, trying to find potential recruits to join the Spider Army while he still mourns for Billy. In fact, one other thing I like is that they showcase just how soon the framing device takes place after the lead-in for Spider-Geddon, because we see Karn just kind of sitting in the main room where they were holding their end of the world celebration for Loom World. So, again, that's still tragic, but ultimately it serves really no purpose for the rest of the comic. So, there you go. But anyway, today, the first story, well, it focuses on Spiders-Man. Yep, remember him, this version of Spidey who was meant to be a hive mind of spiders who all believed that they were Peter Parker? Well, we finally learn his backstory, and it's dark. It's like really dark in a way. And I find it's actually kind of interesting how dark it truly is, considering Spider-Man's whole thing in Spider-Geddon. But I'll get to that when I finish talking about the story. But put simply, just like with many other versions of Spider-Man, it all started with Peter Parker. And in this reality, Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy had managed to get jobs at Horizon Labs. I think it was an internship, but don't quote me on that. But put simply, Horizon Labs recognized the Peter and Gwen's potential and allowed them to come and wanted to have them under their employ. And while Peter and Gwen were getting a tour of the lab, they happened to come across one of their experiments. This giant glassed-off case containing hordes of radioactive spiders, which was meant to be part of an experiment in genetic manipulation, as Horizon was just sporadically introducing the radiation to them through various radioactive bursts. Of course, Gwen finds it disgusting because it's hordes upon hordes of spiders. But unfortunately, there was an accident on this day, as when Peter was checking out the lab, when Peter was checking out the case, he leaned over the railing a little too far and happened to fall right through the glass casing, which I guess they really should have gotten some better glass casing, and he wound up falling right into the vat of the spiders, which, rather than Peter being bitten by a single radioactive spider, he was instead eaten by the entire horde. Yeah, it's really kind of fucked up. However, while Peter Parker the person died, the mind of Peter Parker found a way to live on. Basically, somehow, through some trick of the radiation, Peter's consciousness wound up being absorbed by the spiders, and as a result, it's what created the hive mind that we see in Spider-Man, with all the spiders now having the memories, consciousness, and emotions of the original Peter Parker. It's up in the air, though, whether this is the real Peter Parker now transplanted onto these spiders, or if the spiders themselves just think they're Peter. In fact, which is even more interesting because even Spider-Man has no idea which is the real case. If he's the real Peter in the body of all these bodies of all these spiders, or if these are just the spiders we're just going around thinking they're him. It's a very interesting case, and I love kind of the existential dilemmas that come from such a revelation, because after all, yeah, like I said, even Spider-Man doesn't know which is true. But either way, the spiders do believe that they're Peter and essentially kind of went into hiding. However, because they are still Peter Parker, his sense of responsibility was still there. Or at the very least, his sense of responsibility to those he once cared about, particularly Gwen Stacy. As sometime after the accident, we see that New York has kind of gone down the crapper. According to Spider-Man's own narration, apparently it's gained the nickname of Cruel York now, because apparently this place has some very scary monsters running around. Namely a few supervillains. As once a night, apparently once a night, or once a year, or I don't know, maybe it's every night, there is an event that goes on called Goblin Night. And what happens is that on Goblin Night, everyone has to wear a disguise, kind of like Halloween. And if you don't wear a disguise, well, a horde of goblin-themed supervillains come after you. Specifically, the Green Goblin, the Hobgoblin, the fucking Demo Goblin, and even the Jack-o'-lantern. Basically, what they do is that they grab any civilians they can and bring them to the supervillain, the Goblin Queen. Which, if you don't know who the Goblin Queen is, apparently she's supposed to be Madeline Pryor from the X-Men books, just infused with demonic powers, so to speak. So I guess she demands sacrifice in this world. And so, so the goblins act as her agents. However, on one particular goblin night, Gwen Stacy's on the street not wearing a disguise, and so the goblins end up striking and attacking the crowd she's in, just grabbing up people and doing their best to try and bring them back to the queen. The goblins pretty much outright state that the makeup wouldn't have done anything. They would have grabbed people anyway, but as they're grabbing around, the Green Goblin ends up noticing Gwen Stacy and ends up zeroing in on her. Unfortunately, though, unfortunately for the Green Goblin, Gwen had a guardian angel, as swinging from the city enters Spider-Man, which I can't deny that. It's still cool to see Spider-Man just swinging in, and when you have such a and kicking ass, especially when you have a dark and gloomy setting. In fact, I'm going to give a compliment to the story right there. The beginning of this story really does a great job at setting the mood and really just creating this dour, depressing atmosphere, and shows a world that just shows what could happen to a world if there are no heroes running through it. And so, seeing a genuine superhero come swinging in, all clad in his red and blue underwear, ready to kick ass and take names, it's nice. I like it. It kind of reminds me of the first episode of Power Rangers RPM, when you're shown the world get thrown down the crapper, how everyone is struggling to survive, and there's only like one bastion of humanity left, and even they're struggling to survive, only for these people in red, yellow, and blue spandex to come swooping in and just kicking ass. Again, it's a nice way of kind of uplifting your spirits and showcasing that even in the end of the world, there's still hope and people willing to fight to protect everyone, and they're still confident. So it's a similar, and so even if this is a more darker, twisted variant of the web slinger, it's still cool to see him swinging in and fighting off the goblins. Of course, Gwen immediately knows that this is Peter. I'm guessing that the people at the Horizon had heard of Spider-Man and how he'd been swinging around the city just doing his thing, and they were able to put two and two together and realize that they were Peter. Most likely because the spiders from the radiation experiment did find a way to escape, so they're able to try and figure out that maybe this person in the red and blue spandex is Peter, just absorbed into the mind of the spiders. Unfortunately, though, it's that very same fact that has kept Peter at arm's length. As while Gwen is happy to see him, he does kind of tell her to just stay back while he goes and deals with the horde of the goblins. And he does a pretty good job, just kicking ass, knocking them all out, throwing them aside. Even shoots a web line and starts swinging one of their gliders around. However, the jack-o'-lantern manages to get a good shot in as he sneaks up behind him and slashes the back of his costume with a scythe. Unfortunately, though, as I mentioned, this is Spider-Man, and so rather than there being a meaty body underneath, a horde of spiders come flying out the back of his costume and go right for Jack-o'-lantern's mask, getting right in and crawling through his costume, which ends up causing him to fall to the ground, which, considering how much Spider-Man talked about liking to eat people, it's kind of scary. It's kind of dark and it kind of makes you wonder what they're doing to him inside his costume. As such, when the goblins realize, oh shit, we're not fighting a regular guy here, they immediately decide, screw this noise, we just gotta go, as the Green Goblin grabs Jack-o'-lantern and all of them just fly away. As such, Gwen is very much horrified to see that basically it's true. Sorry, Chindy jumped on the bed and realizes while it's clear she is a little scared of Peter, she also does try lending a helping hand, as she tries to tell him, look, we can help you, we can turn you back to normal, we've been experimenting at Horizon Labs, but, well, Spider-Man ain't having any of it. As he just tells him, what, can you make me normal again? I'm not normal, I'm not a man anymore. And even if you could make me back to the way I was, do you think you could look at me again and not think about this thing that I became? And after that, he just walks into an alley and tells her to stay away from him. Gwen tries chasing after him and says, at least let us help you. But sadly, she's too little too late, as in a nearby trash can, she finds the discarded Spider-Man costume without a single spider there. And the story ends with Gwen just grabbing the costume and crying. It's tragic. Very much tragic and very twisted. So, yeah, that's that. But To offshoot that, we got a much more lighter story afterwards, as today we're going to be looking at the tale of the Spider-Man, who I have talked about in previous issues. Of course I did. Just a few days ago, when I looked at Spider-Geddon number 5, she was one of the characters that helped resolve things in that story. But I suppose I should get more into specifics regarding her backstory. And as I mentioned before, the Spider-Man is meant to be a version of Aunt May who got spider powers instead of Peter Parker. The whole deal is that on the day that Peter went to the Science Expo, Aunt May realized he forgot his lunch and rushed to the Science Expo to deliver it, and so she was the one that got bitten by the spider instead of Peter. She immediately realized that the spider bite gave her superpowers, and so she decided, well, I guess maybe I can become a costume Avenger. And so she wound up sewing together her Spider-Man costume. As such, her first thing as Spider-Man was duking it out with I guess I forgot it was a frog-themed supervillain. I forget what his name is, but she wound up duking it out with him, and while she did prove victorious through the various forms of slapstick, Peter wound up seeing the fight and wound up fainting, and Ame decided, I have to keep this secret to protect his disposition. So, yeah, if I'm not going to make anything clear, Spider-Man started out as a gag character. I'm not even kidding. I actually own the issue of What If she premiered in, and yes, she was just a gag character. Basically just there to be a little one-off joke and just kind of make fun of the tropes surrounding Spider-Man and kind of showcasing Aunt May as the spider-themed superhero, and showcasing that her brand of heroics is more kind of slapsticky than anything, as instead of a web line, she used a thread line, and she wound up using her special mix of dough to trap the supervillain. So, yeah, it's a pretty silly story and stupid, and it's clear that the people writing it had fun with it. But that's neither here nor there. As we show because the thing is, Spider-Man did get revisited. As we saw in the Spider-Verse team-up tie-ins to Spider-Verse, one of the stories in those issues showcased Karn going to Spider-Man's universe with the express purpose of having her be his next target. And in order to get her to come out, he wound up threatening her nephew and husband. And so May, wanting to protect the people she loved, exposed herself as Spider-Man and just told Karn, just take me, but leave my family alone. After that event, while ultimately Spider-Man was spared, because at that point that's when Billy and the other Spideys wound up showing up and recruited Karn to their side, well, the consequences of that story still stuck. And guess what? Today we're going to be seeing those consequences in action as we see Spider-Man swinging through the city on her brand new web shooters. Yeah, we actually here's the thing. While the initial story from What If that introduced Spider-Man was a joke story, this one actually kind of takes the idea of Aunt May being her world's resident Spider-Person and kind of runs with it and showcases kind of how it would work in this environment. As it turns out that after Peter and Uncle Ben learned that May was the Spider-Man, they became her tech support. Peter wound up making a two-way radio signal that allowed them to communicate with her, and to kind of help her further fight crime and actually gain more of an advantage, Peter created her web shooters, and basically what we see in the story is her just swinging around the city for a test run, and Aunt May is actually rather impressed with them. She loves seeing them, and she just is complimenting Peter to hell and back for all of his hard work, while also apologizing to her husband and nephew about lying to them about being the Spider-Man, though both are very much understanding, with Peter even admitting that if their situations are reversed, he'd probably do the same thing. Yeah, they themselves like their mythology gags. But basically, yeah, since they're now privy to the secret, they're going to help May any way they can. And none too soon, because as Aunt May is swinging through the city and about ready to come home after testing out the webs, Peter lets her know that immediately they're getting alerts from the local police that there's a bank robbery going on. And guess what? The bank robber is someone of a superpowered variety. Specifically, it's the Vulture, who is here to rob a bank because he wants the money to fund his research, so to speak. As such, May ends up swinging over and confronts the Vulture, and basically they have themselves a little fight. And it's a pretty impressive fight, as Aunt May, despite being an old lady, is still able to kick ass with her spider powers and manages to outmaneuver the Vulture before knocking him on the ground. As such, May at first thinks the battle is over and immediately wants to alert the police, but Peter warns her not to let her guard down because apparently other reports show that he had projectile weapons, which Vulture immediately utilizes as he tries throwing wing blades at May. Thankfully, she's able to dodge them, but in the midst of her dodging, she wound up losing her balance and allowed the Vulture to go in and deck her in the face. As such, May immediately starts getting back into the fight, but as the fight continues on, Vulture starts asking about the web shooters since, according to earlier reports, she didn't have those. And May does admit that her team provided her with them, and the Vulture, he just kind of scoffs at that, because after all, why should impressive minds have to rely on anyone? She goes around being a hero to these people, and yet she utilizes tools that she herself didn't invent? How could she do such a thing? As such, he just kind of he just talks about again how he thinks that she's a failure, just leeching off the accomplishments of others, whereas he created this suit. It's an example of his brilliance, and this money is going to go towards that research. And so, as he continues mocking Aunt May, he throws the bag of money he has into the air before taking to the skies and trying to make an escape. As such, May ends up shooting a web line at him to try and bring him down. But all this really does is cause her to go flying after him. As such, Peter is kind of hearing all this and freaks out, especially since the web line was not built to be able to support her via the flying, so if it snaps, she'll probably die. But Aunt May is trying to stay calm and focus, and she begins trying to think of ways to try and take down the Vulture. And it's here that she notices something, because the web line she shot at Vulture, it's beginning to cook, because she shot it onto the back of his harness. As such, Aunt May asks Peter a question. What happens to the web line if it overheats? And basically, Peter just tells her that theoretically it should basically harden and turn into a more resilient substance that should be a lot. Hold on. Sorry, I actually looked up the right dialogue. Basically, he says that it'll become a harder, more brittle polymer. As such, Aunt May immediately cuts the comm feed because at this point she needs to concentrate, and ends up shooting another web line at the Vulture, keeping the original line attached to the back of his harness. And as she looks at it, she sees the web line get blackened, and so until she thinks, "Yep, that's the right color for cooked." And then she pulls on it and breaks the web, causing it to just shatter, as now it's so hard that it's a very brittle substance. A piece of which that she grabs before diving at the Vulture and using it to stab right into his harness, causing it to short circuit and for him to start crashing out of the skies. And as such, Aunt May manages to save them both as she shoots a web line to save them while also shooting another web line to tie up the Vulture. And from there, the bad guy is beaten. And as Aunt May is reveling in her victory, she just kind of throws everything the Vulture said back in his face. That while someone like him may not know the benefits of working on a team, she knows that she has people out there caring about her. And if it weren't for them, she wouldn't be able to have such impressive technology like this. She wouldn't have been able to save him. And she always appreciates that because she knows how hard they work. And she loves them. It's a rather nice sentiment. And as such, the story ends with May just bringing the Vulture to the police station, and after she drops him off, he continues damning her, saying that a Vulture can't lose to a spider, but she says if it makes anything better, I don't see the spider as more of an identity. I think I'm just more of your friendly neighborhood aunt. And so the story ends with the police officers that grab the Vulture, just looking at things. She doesn't really look like an ant to me, so it's a fun little gag, but that's where that story ends. But we now get to our final story of the comic, and this one is called, let me see, sorry. This one doesn't actually list the name of the story in the pages. It is called The Spider, Shock the Spider. And this universe is it's interesting to say the least. Basically, the story actually opens with a hostage situation, as we see this world's equivalent of Betty Brant, who in this reality is a news reporter for the Brant Corporation, and basically someone has captured her and her crew and is essentially forcing Betty to make demands that do a news broadcast, letting FBI, the police, basically any government officials know, we've been held captive by a crazy person, we need your help, someone please help us, and this person is asking about a frequency, give it to them. So basically the police are watching this broadcast and are on high alert. As such, they immediately As such, the police immediately gathering as many people as they can to go and meet with them, but one particular police officer, Captain George Stacy, insists on going with them, though his no, he's not a captain at this point, he's probably just a regular police officer, but his captain just tells him, no, you're on injury leave, you still got like 2 weeks left, and while Officer Stacy is not exactly happy with being giving the bench, he has really no choice but to comply as the rest of the police go off. However, it turns out Officer George Stacy has a little ace in the hole as he goes to his police locker and inside we find a duffel bag, and he pretty much just asks himself, "Come on, George, are you really doing this?" Yeah, you are. As he opens up the duffel bag, and we see a black costume inside, a black costume with a ski mask with white lines on it, and a shirt with a spider on the chest. Yep, in this reality, Officer George Stacy is Spider-Man, or just the Spider. I don't really know, but either way, they don't really give him a name in universe. Like I said, the story just calls him the Spider. But point is, he's the Spider guy of this world, and basically, while he operates as a police officer by day, because he also kind of does his superhero shtick under by night whenever no one's looking. As such, knowing about the situation with the brand building, he decides to just jump from rooftop to rooftop to try and catch up to them, as he doesn't have web shooters in this world. But eventually, he does manage to make it to the brand building, and when he arrives, he finds that all the hostages are kind of stuck to the walls via static cling. As such, the Spider ends up going in and asking about what the heck's going on, and basically Betty Brant is, well, at first shocked to see the Spider guy here. She does let him know that some lady has come here and been constantly demanding a frequency, and of course George is wondering what the hell she's talking about, until the criminal comes in and immediately starts demanding that the Spider tell her the frequency. And it's here we meet this universe's version of the Shocker. Sorry, I almost called her Electro. I almost called her Electro because guess what? Electro is the person she's looking for. Basically, you're not given the full story, but it's implied that, but based on her dialogue, the Shocker of this world is the mother of this world's equivalent of Max Dillon. And somehow, in some way, Max is trapped in a frequency that has something to do with the Brand Corporation, and the whole reason that she set all this up, she wants that frequency so she can save her son. Of course, Betty is not saying any of this to Captain George Stacy, which she could be playing dumb. She may genuinely know nothing. I don't know. But what I do know is that this crazy lady with a vest that gives her electric powers is threatening the guy in the spider suit, as well as all these innocent civilians, so George Stacy realizes that she has to be stopped. As such, he tries outmaneuvering her and getting close to try and knock her out, but sadly he can't get too close without the Shocker zapping him. As such, while Betty Brant keeps providing her own commentary, George Stacy is just getting more and more fed up, until eventually, after a good blast from the Shocker, he just says, "You know what, screw this," before he pulls out his gun and shoots at her vest. He doesn't shoot to kill, but he does hit an integral part of the vest, which in turn causes it to explode and ends up negating all of her powers, as all of Betty's crew that was static clung to the wall fall to the floor, and in the flash of light, the Spider has made a clean getaway. As such, the bad guy's been stopped and everybody has been saved. The police eventually arrive, and they do end up arresting the Shocker, but when they take Betty in to get her statement, she does tell them about the Spider. And of course, the captain is just kind of like confused about all this and is trying to make heads or tails of it, but ultimately Betty can only tell him all she knows, that this guy in black came and saved their lives. As such, while the captain's just kind of trying to fight a migraine and try to piece together her story, back in the police station, we see George Stacy as he's typing up a report, and we see that he's opening up an investigation into the Brand Corporation. And that's where that story ends. So, okay, thoughts on this comic? Well, like with last issue, I find this to be a very interesting bevy of stories. Just like with all the other anthology comics, it's still really cool to see the tale of Spider-Man in these different lights, in these different universes, and seeing seeing what certain aspects of the story are carried over between each version, while also seeing what details are changed depending on the scenario. I find it very interesting, and depending on the Spider-Man really depends on the mood mood the story goes for. And I think that each one actually genuinely fits with what they're going for. And to kind of start things off, let's talk about the Spider-Man story. This one is dark, as I said, and it's very surprising how dark it is, considering how Spider-Man operated in Spider-Geddon. Don't get me wrong, in Spider-Geddon, Spider-Man was already a very twisted variant of Spider-Man, considering that while on the outside he may have looked like a Spider-Man, like his whole description was that he was a hive mind of spiders that believed they were Peter Parker. And in that story, he constantly talked about how he wanted to eat people and how he didn't like I don't really want to eat people. I'm just asking for a friend. In the context of, but in the same token, in the context of the story, he was just kind of like a dark joke. Like, he really wasn't the point man. Even in the story, he felt more like the sidekick to Spider-Norman, who Spider-Norman only really took him under his wing because he felt that this particular Spidey was someone that he could use for his plans. And yes, Spider-Man may have had the demeanor of Peter Parker, but it felt as if his morals were a lot looser compared to Peter's, especially when like I said, he kept talking about eating people. As such, in the story, he didn't really feel like the grand threat, so to speak. He felt more like a dark joke that only really existed to help kind of be the sidekick to Spider-Norman and all his crap. However, in the context of this story, it's rather twisted. While he is a joke he is kind of like a dark joke in the present day, that dark joke had to start somewhere, and just as his jokes they're twisted, his origin is even more so, because ultimately, like I said, unlike the main universe Peter Parker, sorry, I got some spit here. Unlike the main universe Peter Parker, who got his powers from simply being bit by a radioactive spider, this version of Peter Parker was eaten alive by a horde of them. And from that initial accident, what came out of it is something else. And even Spider-Man himself has no idea what he is. Is he the real Peter Parker, just now controlling the bodies of all these spiders? Or is he just a horde of spiders with Peter Parker's mind plastered on top of them? He has no idea. And I like just kind of that existential crisis that comes from that. It's very twisted. Imagine just becoming this creature and having no idea whether you're the original in a new body or if this is just a new body that thinks it's you. It's very scary, and in the context of his universe, that it feels like just another twisted thing on top of more twisted things, because it's clear that this universe is not as kind as the main Marvel universe. After all, we're showcasing a version of New York where people are afraid to go outside at night, and the only reason they do go outside is most likely out of necessity. And when they do go outside, they take precautions to ensure that nothing happens to them, like wearing the disguises so that the goblins don't come after them and then sacrifice them to the Goblin Queen. It's very twisted, and it really sets a dour mood. And while things do lighten up with the arrival of Spider-Man, as like I said, despite the darkness, it is still genuinely badass to see a version of Spidey swinging in and kicking ass as if this is just another Tuesday. But with the revelation that the man under the mask is not a man at all, but just this monstrosity made up of hundreds upon hundreds of spiders, it's scary. It's genuinely, honest to God, scary. And despite Gwen wanting to help this version of Peter, it's clear that even she's a little scared of him. And that's part of the reason why Spider-Man stays away from her. Ultimately, he does still care about her, as when she was being attacked by the goblins, he went in to save her, damn the consequences, but by that same token, he also wants to just keep her at arm's length, because he knows, I'm not the man you think I am, and I don't think I ever can be the man you think I am. And ultimately, he believes that it's for the best for everybody if he just stays away. It's why he acts so cold to her. It's why he just walks away despite her pleading with him to come with her. And ultimately, it makes this story it makes this version of Spidey, who almost seemed just like a side character in Spider-Geddon, suddenly that much more tragic, because the dark reality of this is that he was a man once and now he's a monster, and ultimately he has to live with that knowledge every day. It doesn't matter whether he's the original Peter Parker or just a copy of him living in the mind of spiders. It doesn't ultimately, he's just, this is what he is. He can't help it. And while there is a part of him that wants to be back to where he was, it's probably part of the reason why he adopted the Spider-Man persona in the first place. At the same time, he can't be that man anymore. He doesn't, and ultimately he believes that there's no way he can fix this. Despite everyone saying we can fix it, we can get you back to normal, it just leaves this sad, tragic, dour mood throughout the rest of the story. And ultimately it showcases that despite this brief flash of light we saw from Spider-Man going in and being a hero, the dark reality is there are no happy endings here. Sometimes good may triumph over evil, but that doesn't mean that the heroes are entirely heroic. It's genuinely tragic, and the end of the story really just kind of sets the mood that ultimately this character that does come across like a joke in Spider-Geddon truly does have a twisted past, and in a way it makes you feel really sorry for him. Well, not just him, but also the people he loves, as they desperately want to help him, but he keeps denying them. It is all just tragic and sad, and it works really well, and ultimately I think that makes it a genuinely good story. Very sad, very tragic, but still kind of keeping that flair of Spider-Man. So, again, I dig it. It's nice. As for the Spectacular Spider-Man story, this story is very much more lighthearted, because after all, it works off of the whole basis that it's a universe where Aunt May is the world's resident Spider-Person. But this is where things but the difference between this version of the story and the original What If story that the Spider-Man debuted in, this story kind of runs with the idea and showcases how a world where Aunt May was that world's Spider-Person would probably operate, and it works. It genuinely, honest to goodness, works. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still some slight jokes that they played at the expense of maybe having Aunt May be that world's resident Spider-Person, as she constantly talks to people as if she's just this worried old aunt, or she's chastising them if she thinks they did wrong. But really think about this. Aunt May is probably one of the sweetest, kindest people in the Marvel Universe, but she has grit, but she has a will of iron. When she thinks that something is not right, she will stand up to it and call someone out if she thinks that they're doing something stupid. She's done it with she's done it with plenty of heroes, and even in the main Marvel Universe, she has criticized Spider-Man because she believes that what he's doing is too dangerous, and that in many cases he's like a hoodlum. So imagine having a person that sweet and kind, but with that much of a strong will in the role of Spider-Man. And I think it works. Like, it genuinely works. The story runs with the idea and just kind of plays it out to its natural conclusion. Basically, she's good at it. And yes, there are some, and it showcases that ultimately, while she may be Aunt May, she's not like incompetent. She's not a feeble old woman that doesn't know what she's doing. No, she's a costumed superhero who is fighting monsters and knows that if she doesn't do this job, then someone will get hurt. And she doesn't want that. She genuinely cares about everybody. She wants the world to be a better place. It's why at the end of the story she said that she was more like your friendly neighborhood aunt. She genuinely, like with Spider-Man from Earth 3145, she didn't really need to learn the lesson of with great power there must also come great responsibility. Though the opening narration does claim that part of the reason why she became the big superhero she is because she was originally more concerned with Peter's well-being before, the whole robbery thing happened. Though thankfully it showcased that Ben survived that and probably may saved his life. But either way, this is on. But again, this is still, like I said, that she already kind of has the lesson down pat. She already knows I need to use these powers for good because people are relying on me. And add on the fact that she's doing all this not just to protect the world but also her own family. It's sweet, and and it's what makes the story genuinely work because she trusts in her family, because after all, now that Peter and Ben are in on her secret, she now can look to them for help, and she trusts them because she knows them. She genuinely trusts in Peter's scientific capabilities, and also wants to use it, and utilizing what he's learned, she is able to improve her repertoire as a superhero with the web shooters, and ultimately she's able to so easily rely on the web shooters so much because she knows that Peter made them. She knows that Peter wouldn't do anything half-baked. And so when she utilizes them perfectly. And when the Vulture even calls her out for using someone else's text, she doesn't give a shit. She's like, I don't care. My nephew made these things for me. I trust his abilities, and I'm going to use them to help as many people as I can. And I know that I'm always, and I know even if I falter, they'll have my back. I love that. It's sweet. And again, what makes it even better too is that she's smart with the web shooters, which makes sense. After all, it was showcased that she's been acting as the Spider-Man in her universe at least for a little while before this. So she probably did gain a little bit more experience with the whole superhero stuff, so to speak. So she clearly does have she clearly does know what she's doing. But again, the story never forgets that this is still Aunt May. She's still sweet, she's still kind, but she still has a fierce tenacity and willingness not to back down. And combine that with the natural agility, strength, and determination of Spider-Man, and it works well. And basically combine all that together, she's able to take down the Vulture utilizing the tools she has at hand. And she's able to pay attention to enough details and utilize the web shooters combined with the heat from the Vulture's harness to just take it down, but to create a makeshift spear and take the Vulture down. I like that. It's nice. It's sweet. It's kick-ass, but also laced with some genuine heartwarming stuff from Aunt May as she talks about how she genuinely does appreciate having people in her corner. It's nice. It's just sweet, and it works. It really does work, and that's part of the reason why I think the story kind of works just as it does. Because yes, while the initial What If was treated as a joke, and and I'm not gonna knock the original What If story with her. It is a genuinely good story. It's a fun little gag comic, and it's clear the writers are having fun when they made that story. But basically, when you actually stop and think about the idea of Aunt May being that world's spider person, it really helps show. It kind of makes you realize, yeah, that actually could work. Because at the end of the day, Aunt May is the kind of person who would put her life on the line for others. And combine that with her natural heart, her determination, and willingness to back up people who she believes need her help, it genuinely makes for a kick-ass but also very sweet spider person. I dig it. And the story itself does a great job at showcasing that and just kind of being both awesome, funny, but also heartwarming. So again, I think that's a good story. As for the George Stacy as the Spider story, Shock the Spider, I don't know how to fully feel about this one. I like it, but it's also a snippet. Much like with the Spider Bite story from last issue, this one really feels just really like a window into this world to just kind of showcase how a general situation in this universe goes. Like, we don't really learn anything about George Stacy as the Spider, but we are showcased how he typically operates with the identity. As ultimately, just like in many other universes, he's a good cop, and he wants to utilize what he has at his disposal to help others. Yes, his boss tells him, no, you have to be on bed rest. You broke your leg a few weeks back, and we still want you to heal up. But at the same time, he's like, but I want to help people. And so while there is a part of him that doesn't want to go around swinging around town as a vigilante, there's also a part of him that thinks, what if someone dies because if I wasn't there? So I like that. They do that well. But again, there's not really a lot of meat to to the story itself. It's just George Stacy. It's just George Stacy fighting a supervillain, which it's a cool supervillain. And again, this taps more into what I love about alternate universes. Much like the Spider-Gwen universe, the George Stacy universe is just a world that's different. It's just a world where things went a different way. It's not one single event that differentiates this universe from the main Marvel universe. It's just a world that's that, while it's kind of similar, is not entirely the same. With George Stacy being the Spider being the first example, but then likewise we have Betty Brant being a newscaster for a news station rather than working at the Daily Bugle, and likewise having the Shocker be this woman with frazzled hair wearing a vest that's just desperately looking for her son, who's apparently trapped on a TV frequency. We don't know what the story, like, that alone kind of show that alone does intrigue me. That does make me want to know more about about his universe and see more of how it operates. But like I said, going back to how I compare this story to the Spider-Bite story from last issue, it's really just that, a snippet. We're shown details of this universe and showcase a general situation in it, but ultimately we don't know that much about the universe. At best, it feels like a sneak peek into the universe. Though admittedly, I feel like that at least the Spider-Bite story had more personality to it, as it felt more action-packed and fun, and actually felt more akin to a Spider-Man story. Well, this feels a lot more serious with a lot more intrigue to it, which isn't bad. And I guess I appreciate more of the colorful superhero more than the guy in the black suit. So again, the George Stacy story is not a bad one. It genuinely can work. It genuinely is interesting, and it does make me curious about the universe, but ultimately the story feels more akin to a sneak peek into this world rather than a full-blown story, which again, a similar case with the Spider-Bite story, but at least that still felt more complete with having Spider-Bite already be known, and having the story end with her catching a cyber criminal, and ultimately having the guy that was robbed get some catharsis. So at least it felt like an ending. Whereas this story, this one is open-ended. It feels like it wants to have a story to continue on, and that it tried to have this be like a sneak peek to grab people and make them want to see more of it. But unfortunately, this universe has not been revisited in any format, so sadly, this story is not one that's going to be continued. So I do believe that kind of sucks, but again, as a sneak peek, it's interesting. It definitely grabs my interest and does make me want to know more about the world, but it still kind of feels like it's a little lesser because ultimately, while it leaves the door open, no one's going through it. So there you go. Again, not bad, just needed more. So yeah, again, on the whole, Spider-Man, great tragic story that showcases the dark reality of kind of more of a twisted joke character. Taking the Spider-Man story honestly took a joke character and ran with the idea of her being Spider-Man and showcased it well and how she could operate. And finally, the last story, while an interesting little peek into this continuity, definitely feels like it should have had more to it. So there you go. But like I said last issue, I do still ultimately, while my thoughts on the stories are all varied, the Vault of Spiders miniseries is still a genuinely damn good tie-in to Spider-Geddon. Like with Edge of Spider-Verse, Edge of Spider-Geddon, Edge of Venomverse, or Venomverse War stories, basically, it feels like these comics do a good job at showcasing the tale of Spider-Man filtered throughout all these different universes. And basically, regardless of my thoughts on each of the different stories and whether I think some are better or some are worse, it's still unique and interesting to see the tale of Spider-Man throughout all these different worlds, to see what portions of the story are carried over between worlds and what parts are changed. And yes, there is still a sense of responsibility for a lot of these Spider-Men, but how they act on that responsibility depends on the Spidey. We saw the Savage Spider-Man wanting to keep the balance of nature alive in the Savage Land by trying to fend off invaders who would do harm to the ecosystem. We see Spider-Man, despite his dark reality, genuinely trying to protect those he loves and fend off other monsters in the city. We see Aunt May in a world we see a version of Aunt May who wants to protect the ones she loves and help people towards a better future, while also not wanting to stand for bullies. Or likewise, we see Spider-Bite, who lives in a world where everything is done online, who believes that who wants to utilize her own capabilities to make sure that people have a safe place to be online and ensure that they're not taken advantage of. All of them are unique, varied, and interesting, and all of them are things that I love seeing explored, whether it be through a brief snippet or a whole story. And ultimately, Vault of Spiders delivers in all those regards. So, like I said, if you haven't read this miniseries, I recommend it. They're just fun little romps that showcase the different Spideys in their own environments, and overall, it's just enjoyable. So, yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you on Tuesday as we move on to the next round of tie-ins, and we see exactly what Otto's away team was doing while the main team was dealing with the Inheritors. So, till then, I hope you have a good Saturday, and as always, take care.